Welcome back, everybody. It's GleeCon here, and we have our latest episode as we continue to push through Chapter 2. And this episode is called The Fall of the Black Empire. Last episode we had the Pantheon had hit Azeroth. They realized, hey, we got a Titan here. It looks good, but the old gods have gotten here first. They've done some bad things. The elemental lords had used to run this place because this was a particularly chaotic world. The Titan had absorbed all of the spirit into itself, which made itself more awesome, I guess, but it also made the Titans the elemental lords that existed there more and more powerful. And the four elemental lords were water, Neptulon, Therazane, earth, Ragnaros for fire, and Alakir for air. When the old gods got there, they corrupted them and took them over, and those became just kind of arms and branches and empire, little facets of the Black Empire, which is a map we see here. So when the Pantheon gets there, this is what we see. We see this region right here ruled by Neptulon, this small region ruled by Therazane, this one ruled by Alakir, and this ruled by Ragnaros. And actually, if you think about this as sort of like a Pangea, you can kind of see where these things become the Greater Azeroth. This would be sort of like the Dark Shore region. This Alakir would be down by Uldum. This would be, I'm thinking around Deepholm. And this would be over like in the Badlands type of area. Now we also have the rest of the world, the majority of the world, which is actually taken over by the old gods themselves. You have Cthulhu, Silithus and the surrounding regions. You have Yogg-Saron in what I believe becomes Northrend for the most part. And Zoth, which is the majority of the rest of the Eastern Kingdoms. And it's a tough one to say, Isharj. And it's also tough because the other ones we've heard a lot about. Isharj, you don't really hear about while you're playing WoW. And that looks like it's taking up kind of the center, maybe what becomes the Well of Eternity and that center ocean area, but also spread all throughout. Clearly, that's the big daddy of the old gods. All right, let's read the section, Fall of the Black Empire. The victories over the Akir and the Elementals heartened the Keepers, but they knew that their greatest battles were still to come. As one, they turned their righteous gaze on the heart of the Black Empire, the sprawling empire city built around the old god Isharj. By toppling the most powerful Inraki bastion on Azeroth, the Keepers believed they could crush their enemies in one swift stroke. And maybe that's why we don't hear about Isharj. The Keepers and their allies waded through one swarm of Inraki after another as they battled their way toward the mountainous form of Isharj. The broken and mangled bodies of Titan Forged and Inraki alike riddled the landscape by the time the invaders breached the city and assaulted the old god itself. Isharj was more powerful than the Keepers had expected. It poisoned the minds of the Titan Forged, drawing out their fears and darkening their thoughts. The Pantheon grew concerned that the old god would overwhelm their servants. Despite the risk of harming the world, they decided to take direct action. Aman'Thul himself reached down through Azeroth's stormy skies and took hold of Isharj's writhing body. With a heave of his mighty arm, he tore the old god from the crust of the world. In that moment, Isharj's gargantuan bulk was ripped apart. The immensity of the old god's death rattle shattered mountaintops and obliterated hundreds of Titan Forged where they stood. That's why we have not heard of Isharj. He was destroyed. Isharj was dead, but its tendrils had bored more deeply through Azeroth than Aman'Thul had ever imagined. In excising the old god from the world, he had inadvertently ripped an eternal wound in Azeroth's surface. Volatile arcane energies, the lifeblood of the nascent Titan, erupted from the scar and roiled out across the world. Horrified by this turn of events, the Pantheon realized they could not risk killing the other old gods in such a manner. The malignant creatures had embedded themselves so deep into the world that tearing them out would destroy Azeroth itself. The Pantheon knew that the only course of action was to imprison the old gods where they lay and contain their evil forever. That seems to be a recurring theme of how they handle their problems. It would be a difficult task, but it would be possible with the aid of the Keepers. At the Pantheon's behest, the Titan Forge devised a plan to shatter the last vestiges of the Black Empire forever. They would battle each of the old gods directly. Once they had weakened the creatures, Arcadus would create subterranean chambers to contain them. Mimron would then fashion colossal machineries to lock the old gods in place. When this work was done, Loken would imbue each prison with a great enchantment that would neutralize the old gods' evil. With their plans formed, the Titan Forged began their campaign. Great battles tore across the land as the Titan Forged fought their way southeast to the bastion of Azeroth. After overwhelming the old god, the Keepers used their powers to encase the creature in an underground prison. Next, the Titan Forged marched southwest to the sprawling temple city that had grown around the third old god, Cthulhu. The Keepers and their allies purged swarms of Enraki before assaulting the old god itself and subduing it. Much as they had done with N'Zoth, the Keepers entombed the entity beneath the earth and constructed a prison of their own, devising over its form. Only one old god remained, the vicious and cunning Yogg-Saron. It would not fall so easily. As the Titan Forge closed in on Yogg-Saron's crumbling northern stronghold, the old god unleashed the greatest of its generals, the Cathraxi. The Cathraxi were monstrous warbringers, larger and more resilient than the other Enraki. They possessed great strength and brutal intellect, and their dark powers and maledictions could drive even the Titan Forged to madness. The giant tentacle-faced Cathraxi whipped the remnants of the Black Empire into a frenzy. They swarmed the Titan Forged on all sides, thinning their ranks. By the time the Keepers and their allies reached Yogg-Saron, their forces were greatly diminished. They found that they lacked the strength of numbers to defeat the old god. Yogg-Saron would have destroyed the Titan Forged completely, if not for the heroic efforts of Odin. Although scarred and battered by war, Odin summoned his waning strength and inspired the Titan Forged to launch a counterattack. He commanded Loken to weave a grand illusion spell that forced the Cathraxi to see themselves and even Yogg-Saron as the enemy. As the Black Empire's forces turned on one another, Odin swooped in to cut down his confused foes. The other Titan Forged followed his lead, and together they succeeded in pacifying Yogg-Saron. As they had done with Cthulhu and N'Zoth, the Keepers buried the entity beneath the earth, locking it away in a monolithic enchanted prison. Alright, cool. So we have N'Zoth, which again was the Eastern Kingdom ones. You don't see a lot there, and maybe that's because they successfully got that one first, but actually N'Zoth is, I believe, in BFA, so these pieces in the middle, that might be Kultiras and stuff like that, and where the forces of N'Zoth came off. Yogg-Saron's obviously part of Northrend, and especially in Dragonblight and stuff like that, you see a lot of the remains of him, and you definitely see these, whatever they were calling, the Cathraxi. They're definitely a more late edition because you see the Enraki and the Akir already in Cthulhu area and Silithus. But by the time you get to see really those faces, there's some up there in Nepulon as well. But the ones we see later that are sort of like looking like mind flayers, like Illithids, that's the Cathraxi. And all right, so the Black Empire has been subdued. One was destroyed. That did serious major damage, which I'm sure we'll read about what happens with that in future chapters. And the others we know just sort of are temporarily locked away. Another side note, we have some cool stuff talking about Odin, and I know they've made, they wore it on their sleeves that they're using Odin and Loken to be sort of parallels to Norse mythology. They even having Odin have one eye, and Loken, I think, is supposed to be like Loki. And here we see some touching with that, where he's using illusion magic and trickery to get the enemy. All right, so a lot of cool things, a lot of interesting seeds that are planted here that then further explain a lot of the cool stuff, especially with the old gods and the ancients and Odin and Loken that we see in future parts of World of Warcraft and the greater Warcraft universe. Thanks for giving me your time. Thanks for listening. It was a pleasure. See you guys in the next episode.